Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, we are at the Institute for the Investigation of Communist Crimes and the Memory of Romanian Exile in Bucharest. We continue a discussion that we started last night at the Bucharest City Museum in the series Ideas in the Agora, which is now at its 96th edition. Since yesterday, officially, this series takes place under the auspices of the Academia Europaea, and I am very glad to say that over the next few months, our strategic plan of opening a Bucharest-based regional knowledge hub will happen, and a number of important international events are in the planning and in the making. Among others, in 2026, we shall host in our new hub, which is done in conjunction by Academia Europaea and the Romanian Academy, we shall host in Bucharest the annual conference of the Academia Europaea. We want to do extraordinary things in this forthcoming hub. And for this, we have selected a number of crucial topics for in the humanities and social sciences especially. But the hub is going to have an encyclopedic profile like the Academy, of course. I will concentrate, however, as the main strategist of this hub, on the missing links of public and academic debates in our world, which are the fundamental topics in social sciences and humanities that are pretty badly mishandled, if you ask me. One of these topics, which we have actually engaged in the series Ideas in the Agora, Gabriel Andreescu here present is one of the veterans of this discussion, has to do with transitional historiography and retrospective justice. The perfect special guest star for this discussion was, of course, it is Antoon De Baets, whom I'm not going to introduce at length. He is the president of the International Commission for the History and Theory of Historiography, with which I was closely connected for many years. I was Secretary General many years ago, and I was also a member of the board of the International Commission for Historical Sciences. And we would like, together with the section of the Academy, section of History and Archaeology, together with the International Commission for History and Theory of Historiography, to continue this debate along these lines and improve it. In many ways, our two-day event here is a kind of prequel to a large conference, very large, almost a congress, I would say, which will take place from the 21st to the 24th of May in Lisbon at the Universidade Nova, organized by the International Network for Theory of Historiography, with the kind support of the International Commission for History and Theory of Historiography, which is running several panels, which will be devoted to the grand theme, history and responsibility. Now, my plan for today is to have an informal exchange on these topics, to which I will come back in a second. And for this, we have invited Gabriel Andreescu, who, I'm saying this for foreign audiences, is the foremost Romanian expert in issues of the connection or the nexus between history, ethics, and justice. A former dissident, physicist by initial training, then he retrained as a political scientist, And as a civic activist and political scientist, he is coming up with a series of works of first importance for the study of the topic at hand. We have here Cosmin Popa from the Institute of History Nicolae Iorga, who is a specialist in recent history, who has covered things ranging from the history of Russia and the Soviet Union to the recent history of Romania, of communist Romania, in many books and journal articles and other publications. He was there last night and intervened in the discussion. Then I also welcome Stefan Bosomitu, who is one of the veterans of this rather new effort by Romanians to deal with their recent history. And the avatars, the institutional avatars are interesting to mention because it all started as a private enterprise of a combination of friends, Romanians and Dutch, around the former ambassador, the late Koen Stork, who actually got the first money to start it up. And we were all there. I was mostly from a distance, but then getting closer and trying to support the international development of this institution under the directorship of Andrei Pipidi, trying to connect them to similar institutions in the world, starting with Germany, with mixed results, I have to say. But then this institution, which was studying recent history, got some public exposure, not much. The themes were not particularly interesting for the Romanian society, despite a lot of fuss in the media and in some, let's say, more marginal publications. There was very little in terms of technical, let alone methodological, theoretical contribution to the field. Then the Institute came under the aegis of various political parties and morphed into different, under the same title, different institutes for recent history, going through institutional crisis, which were political, in fact, mostly not institutional necessarily, personality crisis and things of this sort. And fortunately, under the aegis of the Romanian government, we now have this institute for the investigation of communism crimes and the memory of Romanian exile. And I'm very glad that this is so, and they have this discussion here at this institution. Joining us is Florin Soare, who is a researcher at the same institute, and we shall start moving in. I would like to thank Daniel Sandru, the president of the institute, who cannot be with us today, for his support, and Daniel Philip for all his technical and organizational support. Now, I would also like to welcome here particularly His Excellency Zakoni Botond, the Ambassador of Hungary to Romania, who is an old student of Romanian history. I can testify that he is a good student because also was one of my best teachers at Central European Universities a lifetime ago. And also Bea Huska, who is an expert in recent history, focusing on issues of human rights especially, and covering an area that goes basically from the core countries of Central Europe and expanding luckily for us also to the Romanian scene. They were also here last night. Now, transitional historiography, to give you my take on it very briefly, has this fundamental problem that in Central and Eastern Europe is a rather recent import. It is an import from Western Europe, but from a certain moment in the history of Western Europe, which is the 1990s. it came with the theoretical methodological paradigm of recent history that had been developed from the 1960s, mostly in West Germany, and thus carrying all the burdens, historical, psychological, political, and otherwise, that are included in the discussion of recent history. This is why for many decades in Germany proper, this idea of transitional historiography was first a transition from what? From the historiography of the interwar period, right? We should not forget that we have that first transition, right? And whenever we discuss the recent history as conducted by German researchers, from the good old times of Vergangenheitsbewältigung in the 1960s, distancing, dealing with, treating the past, with elements of, if I mean, I would say, elements of traditional philosophical German elements like the reversal, the Aufhebung, and sometimes the mistranslation and of a number of things. So they had to deal with that in the 1960s first. Distancing history as it had happened unfolded in the interwar period in Germany, but also German historiography, together with its social, political, cultural, intellectual, more generally, foundations. This meant that the whole trend of German historiography from the interwar years had been abandoned. By whom exactly? By the very students of those professors who in the 1930s and 40s, without being Nazis or Nazi sympathizers, all of them, many were, but not all, had to be somehow censored, cancelled, if I can use a fashionable word today. So it is under these very peculiar circumstances and under huge pressure from the United States, some friendly and collegial, neighborly pressure from the French as well, who thought this was their moment to teach some lessons to the rest of Europe, again. And thus the whole discussion in Germany got stuck for a while in this, and it took other developments that I cannot describe in detail here, but I know in detail, because this was unfolding throughout the 1990s when I was very present in these debates. It moved towards, let's say, a more comprehensive understanding of the past. And in the 1990s, into the second transitional historiography that Germans have produced, which is post-communist transitional historiography. They thought they can come up with their expertise from the first transitional historiography, with the reflections from the, let's say, ripe stage of this debate from the 1980s, when the discussion was theoretically, methodologically moving towards more directly ethical, theoretical issues, leaving behind the bulk of the substance of the first interest in this discussion and these debates. And this has, again, morphed into a debate about historical consciousness, no? Geschichtsbewusstsein, as a fluid, ever-developing, fundamental dimension of a democratic society, a truly democratic society, where moving in sync with historical developments, citizens, instructed by those who know better, trained to understand history, develop a historical consciousness that is helping them move on. So a second. Now, the thing is that paradoxically enough, West Germany was trying to implement that model in East Germany. And I have to say, with very mixed results. I have to say it all now briefly. They had to conduct purges in the ranks of East German social scientists and historians. I remember being one of the very few non-German experts who were involved in this system, which were, to me, coming from a former communist country, reminding of course, all this was in the name of democracy and freedom, but I remembered, and I could spot immediately upon entering the room where these people were about to be part of the conversation. I didn't need any kind of presentation to know who was from East Germany in the new reunited wiedervereinigt Germany. I knew them immediately who they were, because they were shy, they were not. Many of them were staunch Marxist historians, some of them exceptionally good historians of the working class and social historians, whose work is still usable once you know, brush aside the various Marxismus und Leninismus cliches. You are left with something that remains solid and useful and was recycled rather interestingly by the new reunited historiography of Germany. I'm saying this also because most Germans do not talk about it, for reasons that I don't want to let you guess. And thus, this process was going on in parallel with an attempt by the reunited Germany to export this model of the belated model of Vergangenheitsbewältigung to post-Eastern European countries. And this is where we were supposed, as Eastern Europeans, to say, whenever attending conferences and congresses in international things in Western Europe. I was one of the few who was not interested in this exercise, but rather in suggesting that the historical experience of East Europe, East Central Europe, with a critical reading of the history of the West itself, would be more conducive to a critical reassessment of both history and historiography, historical theory. And that was this is the way I see this. Now, to retrospective justice. I call it retrospective justice because there is no retroactive justice. It is not active. And thus, retrospective justice is mostly a form of historiography, if you ask me, not a form of justice. Because these people here at the institutes are struggling like crazy to document and then turn into juridical cases very obvious personal histories and institutional histories that have to do with repression under communism, and they have a hell of a time trying to prove it where? In the public sphere and in the courts of law of this republic, which is part of the European Union, respects the rule of law, abides to all the beautiful principles from ethics and morals to political integrity and to everything. And nonetheless, the discussion is not a discussion about the past that much, it is also a discussion about the present. And thus what they do, to me, is a form of history, and this, I salute them for doing that. And unfortunately, not a form of justice. The history of Romanian legal cases in which they have been very much involved, from Gabriel all the way to here, especially them, is an indication that the time is maybe not right to actually confront this past on its terms, and actually, because what they have tried desperately, I would say, together with the surviving son of someone who was among the last people killed in a prison by communists, and they tried, I would say quite, and for the son, rather tragically. It's a farce if you look at it from a distance, but it's a tragic farce. Because they are trying to demonstrate that things that these people were doing, that is killing someone for his opinions in a prison in the 1980s, was a crime. And finally, the courts of law of Romania, all the way up to the Supreme Court, were embracing the rhetoric of the Securitate. Starting with the fact that, well, after all, in the 1980s there was no repression anymore, so give us a break. We all know for a fact that this all happened in the bad old times. So repeating the narrative about Stalinist Romania, which was one of the foundations of Ceausescu's national communism, that is distancing them because they were bad and Stalinists, and praising ourselves for being, and the same, but to the world, and this is, I think, one of the most fascinating examples of complete mistreatment of, and unethical, whatever you want, inhuman, I would say, treatment of the past. Because they were using the exact same words, phrases, arguments as those. So there was no need, and this brings me to my last point, which is break and continuity, one of our fixations at the ideas in the Agora, and which is that since the sons and daughters, the grandsons and granddaughters of the perpetrators are now the majority population of experts in and judges and legal experts and so forth in Romania's courts, well, guess what? They are more, how shall I say, loyal to their family traditions, which they do not want to discuss in public, than to the principles they claim to represent and they hail in the public discourse. So this is pretty much what I had to say to set the stage here. Now, I will start with our guest of honor. Well, he's a friend of us anyway, so the honor comes with friendship, so we can also brutalize him a little bit as a best friend. So, Don, what do you make of all this here in Romania? That's the first.
You will forgive me that I will not speak specifically about the Romanian situation and the Romanian process of Vergangenheitsbewältigung or retrospective justice, but that I will limit myself to some general remarks that are, I think, are also applicable to the Romanian situation. And if you agree with this, and if you do not kick me out now, right away, then I have good news.
You see, you learn about Romanian ways.
I give good news and bad news. 2 points of good news, 2 points of bad news. Let me start with the bad news. 2 points of bad news. The first is, when I hear the word retrospective justice, and if I hear the concept of retrospection in general, there is one major obstacle when looking at the past, and that is a bias called the hindsight bias or the outcome bias. Let me explain very briefly what this is, this terrible animal that is called the hindsight bias. It is the fact that you know the outcome of past events in the present. That is the outcome. You have hindsight, the advantage of hindsight. And what most believe is that the fact that you know the outcome of past events clarifies your historical understanding. And that is not so. I think that the possibility of historical knowledge is not favored, but rather obliterated by that hindsight bias. The fact that we know how things evolved and developed does not clarify our understanding of the past, but rather blocks it. Why? Because since we know the outcome of events, we know that communism has passed away, and we know that that transition in Romania was a very ambiguous transition. We know all this now with the benefit of hindsight, but this blocks us from understanding what the possibilities were at the material time in the past. There were possibilities at that time, but since one of these possibilities became reality and the others did not become reality, we are becoming blind for all these possibilities that were not materialized. And that is the terrible evil of the hindsight bias. This has, I can tell you, paralyzed my belief in history for many years. Second piece of bad news that I learned from Robert Lucas. Robert Lucas was an historian by training, but he became a very famous economist, even Nobel Prize for economics. He developed a theory of rational expectations, which applied to history means the following: that moral lessons are not possible. And together with Robert Lucas, I do not believe that we can draw moral lessons from the past. Why? Well, the reasoning of Robert Lucas was, take for example War and Peace. If you can learn, if you have the ability to learn from the past, then you would say that after every war, people would try to avoid next wars. The fundamental idea of never again. And that, if we took this seriously, this idea of avoiding the war, that in the end, and after much error and trial, war would disappear from the earth, if we were able to learn from the past. But wars, armed conflicts, have not disappeared from the earth, on the contrary. Therefore, moral lessons do not exist, and if they exist, they do not help. This is the reasoning of Robert Lucas in his theory of rational expectations that I believe in very much. It is very doubtful that we can draw moral lessons from the past. Because if we could, the world would be another planet, a better planet. So in the interplay between continuity and change, a believer in moral lessons privileges continuity and ability to learn, and neglects the fact that things change by the knowledge we have from the past. These were my 2 bits of bad news. Now, 2 bits of positive news. The first is, and I agree, I concur here with Sorin, that I'm a believer in historical awareness. I think that we can develop, all citizens, and of course historians in the first place, that we can develop our historical awareness, our ability to locate ourselves in the vast flow of events. This is not simple, because I say a second ago, the flow of events. But how should we call it, these mass of events in world history? Is it a flow? Is it a chain? A chain of events implies that there is much causality and much necessity from going from one event to the other. If we use the expression chain of events, if we use the expression flow of events, this means that there is more room in our view, more space for contingency, for mere coincidences. So it is not easy, that idea of historical awareness, and also for another reason, because we know a lot about the past, we know also a little bit about the present, but looking at the present is more difficult, I think, than looking at the past, because we are still like fishes in the water, we are still in it. And the future is a black box for most of us, especially for historians, historians are very bad predictors of the future. But most are very bad predictors of the future. So in this mass of past, present and future, there is a big asymmetry. In our knowledge about the past is larger than about the present, and it is almost non-existent for our knowledge of the future. Although we can, of course, speculate that some trends will continue or discontinue. But in general, I believe that our ability to locate ourselves in the big stream of events is a possibility. And that gives you a feeling of mastery over time, a feeling, and an impression. And it is very tricky, and it can be very treacherous to think that you understand the flow of time. But at least this is something we can develop, and this can mature, and it is our duty to teach our children in the primary and secondary schools to develop a sense of historical awareness. My second and last point of good news is retrospective justice is a concept that I translate as moral judgments. Moral judgments about historical figures in the past and what they did or omitted to do. And there I am supported by human rights philosophy. And I tell you why. Because human rights philosophy has one big principle that is very little known, but that is crucial for our evaluation, our moral evaluation of the past. And that principle, that human rights principle, is called the non-coercion principle. That's absolutely fundamental in human rights philosophy. What is the non-coercion principle? It is very simple, but it belongs to the core of the idea of human rights. Let me speak about freedom of expression, one of the most important human rights. We all have, you will agree, we all have the right to freedom of opinion and expression. Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. If we apply the non-coercion principle to the right to freedom of expression, we should add a second sentence to we all have the right to express our opinions. Namely, if we have the right to express our opinions, by the same token we have the right not to express our opinions. That's the non-coercion principle. People cannot, by the grace of their right to freedom of expression, people cannot be compelled to express their opinions. When we apply this to moral judgments, this gives us a solution for the old problem that Mark Bloch and many others have tried to solve, and that was the question, do we have to understand the past, or do we have to understand and judge the past? Well, human rights philosophy, and more specifically the non-coercion principle, gives a solution for that centuries-old debate about should we should we issue moral judgments about past figures? Namely, yes, we can. We can morally judge personalities from the past. We can judge a Ceausescu. We can, but we are not obliged. Nobody can coerce an historian to morally judge historical figures from the past. But nobody can prohibit other historians from doing so. So the solution for the old problem, should we understand the past or should we understand and morally judge the past, is simple. Both options are credible. Both options are allowed at the condition that you do not force other historians to take your point of view. If you say, I can morally judge, go ahead and do it, of course, with evidence. Because you are a historian, you are not a charlatan. You have to do it with the evidence. And then go ahead and issue a moral judgment about, for example, a Ceausescu. But if you say, in all honesty, my professional integrity prohibits me from issuing judgments about past figures, then that's okay too. So human rights and the non-coercion principle leaves open the liberty to morally judge past figures or not. So, to summarize, retrospective justice, the retrospection is difficult because of the hindsight bias and the impossibility to draw moral lessons from the past. On the other hand, we all have an ability, although sometimes it is a weak ability, but we can develop it. We have an ability to develop our historical awareness, our awareness of being situated in the big chain or flow of events. And as far as moral judgments are concerned, which are a form of retrospective justice, you are at liberty. When you say, I have to morally judge a Hitler and a Ceausescu, as an historian you can do, provided you fulfill your professional duties and you bring evidence to the table. But if you say, in all honesty, I cannot morally judge, and the retrospective justice is for you but not for me, then we should respect this too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. 2 points. One is that other, let's say, brotherly and sisterly human sciences have dealt with these issues at great length forever. This, of course, in the history of ideas, which includes works upon, builds upon literary history, religious history, and theology, history of theology, and so forth. One of the main principles remains valid, which is the principle of Einfühlung, which is a form of empathy with the topic you discuss and research, which is rooted in the precondition that you are not, what historians insist a lot about, you are not projecting anachronistic ideas, values, and especially possibilities into the past. So, when, for instance, the Annales School, and Bloch, of course, being in the area, was part of this debate for decades, they raised this issue of the mental equipment of a generation, or l'outillage mental. What was possible? What could these people think? What could these people dream, fantasize, fear, hope? This is a fundamental object of history, not only of history of ideas, but this is a fundamental historical principle which we need to respect. This is preventing us from exporting from our present which in many ways is a result of that past, but in very, very interesting and complicated ways that need to be deconstructed and analyzed and critically reconstructed to become operational. So that to me is an absolutely fundamental point. In literary history, this was also done. There are fields in which, so in many ways, historians insisted on, let's say, those who were not directly influenced or indirectly but solidly influenced by the Annales school, they really were not so interested in these past possibilities and these past mental universes in which people were living. This includes, of course, an analysis of the contingent possibilities which in utopian studies can be discussed, of the uchronias that one could build in year 1815 or in 1945. You have to go back and reconstruct those horizons of possibilities that are accessible and were in fact shaped to and shaping whoever, historical actors, and even then those who are doing the history of previous epochs and phenomena from that particular. It took a while, a long while, to non-historical social sciences such as postmodernist sociology to have the revelation of the situatedness of people, ideas. We have known this all along. Yeah, things are situated in time, in place, in contingency schemes, and a fluidity of developments that one should be aware of. So, yes. Now, will I start at this end of the table and go on? Should I use any? Maybe I should start at that end of the table. You try to be marginal, Gabriel, but it's hard. Gabriel Andrescu has spent, as we all know, more than half of his life. In the first time he was actually busy towards the end of the first part of his life, he was busy fighting the system of communism in Romania. So he was emerging as one of the few real dissidents of this country at the time. People who had no contacts that could protect them, extracting them to the United States, not family, not anything that would help. Not really a network of people that could help and protect him. When we do the history of resistance and opposition to communism, we should remember that people have very different forms of situatedness themselves. He unfortunately had one of the bad ones, no one to help him out in case of Trump. This is why he got to prison, of course. Then he devoted his life to the understanding of things that he had lived before 1989 and to the rebuilding of the society according to the solid principles of human rights to which he had subscribed already before, and it was hard. And afterwards, when it was not impossible, not forbidden, but it was almost as hard as before. So he did that. Then now, directly to the discussion at hand, he has written a number of books devoted to resistance, opposition, intellectual resistance and opposition to communism in Romania. And this has been, let's say, a dimension of his work, which also includes quite technical studies on human rights that refer to current and unfolding events. He didn't stop in 1989. The topics continued to be there for the evolving society. But most of his books deal with an analysis of intellectual resistance and opposition dissidents of all sorts, including imaginary sorts, to the form of government and state that we had before. So, Gabriel, whatever you want to say, you are welcome to say. I know you follow the conversation. I'll have to say, there was a moment, a juncture in his work, witness, which was his coming closer and closer to debates in historiography about responsibility, ethics, that is not only in human rights and these fields, but also more and more into historical studies. And I greeted that development. I was very happy about it, and I'm very happy to have him with us today. Gabriel, the floor is yours.
Sorry, what I say. I can say after your words. Thank you so much. Thank you, also Antoon De Baets. I love so much your discourse and your accent. You put on ontological aspect of the work, the contingency of unfolding events. And you prove, you wrote about the fact that denying that contingency results in crimes against history, crimes against historians. And my last analysis, my last preoccupation was related to the memory of history. And yes, I found this idea that the denial of the contingency of unfolding events is very problematic for the moral judgment and so for the ethics of memory. So I'm so happy that I find you through Serena and Turkey, and I'm ashamed that I didn't know your works I do in the next years and try to get your thinking in detail. So, I would like to focus on another idea noticed in this leaflet. The option usually has for retrospective history as against the retroactive history. And I consider that is a kind of reaction to the fact that we speak about retroactive history, retroactive justice, but in fact, following what is happening in real life, we see a lot of injustice in connection with dealing with history, dealing with living persons, deeds in the past. Already, Sorin referred to a case, Gheorghe Ursur's case. Someone was tortured and killed by Securitate officers, and immediately after 1990, his children tried to get justice. They needed 33 years to fight in the courts in order to get the final decision. And which is this decision? That in fact the killers and torturers, yes, must be exonerated after so many years. And more than that, they did in a way that alarmed the public. They did something what you name crimes against history. Their main argument was that after 1965, in Romania there was not repressive policy against people who deny the rule of the regime. Yes, the highest court, after 33 years, decided in this way. This is an example of awful injustice related to our idea that after the revolution we need to follow retroactive justice. There are different kinds, there are different categories of this behavior. One of these categories is represented by Historiography. Historiography was all his life critical towards communism, contemptuous communism. Of course, he was intelligent people, guy, and normal man. And because this was his behavior, he was put under coercion when he was 17 years old. So he was a student. He did something against the regime of Austria, and the result was that he was put to write informative notes to the Securitate officers, because if not, they could put him in jail, of course, expel from the school. And he did this kind of informative notice. But during so many years, till 89, there is no singular informative note in which he would denounce anti-communist activities. No one. On the contrary, the notes of the reports of the officers complained about his lack of cooperation. This is the reality.
Make it short because it's a long history.
It's a long story, and we have the story.
You told it.
Oh, okay, yeah. And
I'm very grateful that you told it.
the result was that, in the name of this justice, he was put under public opprobrium. But who were those who supported mainly this action against him? CNSS, so state institution, and the courts during 16 years. Yes, 16 years. Those institutions supported the public opprobrium against the reality, against the facts hidden in the archives, but also against the facts in the public. I say this is a category, it's not only his case, but his exemplary from this point of view.
There is just 1 minute,
Yes.
no, I will have to cut it short, I guess, because it's about me, but I will have to say something which is methodologically important, however, for other cases. I was struck all the way through this by the fact that 99% of the documents preserved by the very Council for the Study of the Archives of the Securitate, 99% of the papers, were presenting me as I really was at the time. That is one of the undoubtable young, upcoming intellectuals of this country. Okay, the documents are there. And there was no reference whatsoever in any of the documents of the CNSS against me. The courts of law have nothing to do with this because they have to judge based on the papers that they were receiving. I have no problem with that. Oh, they were slow because they have too many cases. That's another thing. Otherwise, I have nothing to say because they did their job. They said there is nothing and forget it, and there is nothing, forget it, and okay. But the thing is, however, submitting the case of, without any mention to the 99% of the, but the council had made, however, a mistake, which is, upon my request, they gave me 1,500 pages of documents, and I had them. You see, that was a very sad technical mistake that I couldn't just claim, but I could also prove with their documents. That's a very funny. So the methodology of this, which transcends my case and happened to others, was this. Indeed, in many cases, in my case, let's say, is typical in some ways. The documents that were even publicly available, because researchers could access them, who were then not destroyed by anybody, which were then, were not used. I don't know if you talk about the ethics of research or whatever, studying the recent past, then this becomes really a sinister joke. It cannot be. Yeah.
Okay, 8 years in the trial.
What is time flies? Okay.
It's against the principle of right to justice of the convention, right? The Human Rights Convention. But there is a final category, because what I have to say that we have really a problem with the retroactive justice. This is injustice, and perhaps we have to put more attention to these aspects about judging the past. Following a law adopted some years ago, the children of the former political prisoners has the right to an allowance, on the idea that they suffered too as their parents, when the parents were in prison. Okay, what happened with the family? And this shows the law which recognized the sufferers. But this allowance is not given to the children of the former political prisoners or regional, without any respect to how those people were judged. And we know how it happened. So for me, it's not about only a discriminatory behavior, attitude. It is a cruel one. And when I see all these kind of facts, these kind of categories, I say we have an extraordinary problem in Romania with retrospective justice in a very practical way. It is not only a problem of theory. It is a problem of practical aspiration to a more just society.
Although, of course, lustration was on the agenda of many political organizations, civic organizations, political parties. So this was going and going and going around in circles, referred to by everybody, but of course nothing happened. And this was happening while first the secret police, not so secret police, and then the party, and then their children, and then their grandchildren were running the country, were pillaging the country and everything. So, and this, how shall I say, moral idea of the lustration was always there in the public sphere, always evoked, always seen as a must of the, as a moral imperative of the entire society. And yes, okay. Then we move on to Stefan Bossonito, a veteran, as I said, of all these issues.
Okay, I'll be more focused somehow because I intend to discuss a little bit our activity, our institute activity within this field of
Which is very useful.
transnational historiography and retrospective justice. And from what I've heard up until now, this is our kind of activity or history up until now. It is about that. The institute was founded in 2005 and started operated a couple of months later in early 2006. One of its main tasks was to document and investigate crimes. Our activity started in parallel with another initiative, Presidential Commission for the Study of the Communist Dictatorship was established almost in the same time. They drafted a final report which allowed the Romanian authorities to condemn the communist regime as illegal and criminal. And the final report also made some of recommendations, but the problem is, from our point of view and from the point of view of our activity, all those recommendations were kind of soft, because they never kind of intended to establish a legal framework that would allow us and facilitate us to bring into justice the perpetrators and those who were responsible for the crimes that we investigated. Like, for the example, for the first 4 or 5 years of our activity, we kind of drafted and filed several penal notifications against perpetrators, directors of former political prisoners, and everything, and none of them reached the court. And the problem was that we had a legal framework that was that almost didn't allow it at all, you know, because we have statute of limitations on the crimes for a murder, for example. It was 25 years and so on. That was surpassed, but after a lot of years, when we tried to make accusation or accuse those perpetrators and try to develop somehow a framework in which their crimes were not simple crimes, simple murders, but some part of something bigger. And we have this possibility of accusing one of crimes against humanity or genocide, which on these crimes there is no statute of limitation. And that kind of allowed us to bring into justice 2 former directors of important political prisons in the 50s, and they were sentenced in 2014 and 2015, I think. But that took us somehow like almost 7-8 years to reach that solution. That's it was referred earlier, the Gheorghe Ursu case. That's the same thing there, you know, because they had the opportunity to kind of bring into justice those who were the perpetrators, you know, those who are responsible for his murder. Like the prosecutors started the investigation in early 1919, and you know he was murdered in 1985. So 85, yes. So they had all the time to solve this case, you know, but they postponed the solution up until now, when this case has to be framed somehow, or the accusation has to be re-evaluated as crimes against humanity. And now the prosecutor has to determine the fact that the communist regime after 1965 was repressive in its essence, and that's like the big issue with this case up until now. Our efforts on this issue of investigation and documenting crimes is still underground. Is undergoing up until now, and I will not refer to this, let's say, present investigation, because we have here my colleague from Soare, who is in charge of this investigation, mainly related to the children who are institutionalized, mainly children they were considered to be with disability that were institutionalized in the 90s. But I will let Soare tell you more about this present day investigation we conduct here at our institute.
Maybe we should go on immediately to Florin Soare and let him speak. Now, if you want to speak in Romanian, do that, and then I will do the interpreting. Just one mention about the interpretation, the instant translation. I told a little bit. I was watching on the internet their debates in Berlin at a very interesting conference in which, of course, Norbert Frey, as I said, was brilliant, and Nikolai Kopasov, an old friend, was also good, making good points. Now, this was done for a German audience, of course, because it was in a German institution for a German audience. Now, many people there spoke English. And I got the version of the sternest, most energetic, strict, I would say more form of German, because the Dolmetscher, with one exception, the ladies interpreters, lady interpreters, with just one exception, who spoke a normal, nice German, calmly and in a poised way. Everybody else was reminding me of that German that I connected always to the times under discussion. So it was, I thought it was a kind of unintended consequence. Well, I don't mention that technically the instant translation was perfect. I'm grateful, but I guess the emotional burden and all that made them revert to a form of German that to me was totally, absolutely co-substantial with the topic at hand. I'll try to avoid that in this. Așa.
Mulțumesc. Coordonez în institut investigațiile cu privire la abuzurile comise împotriva minorilor instituționalizați în România în anii 80.
Okay. So, as this was mentioned before by our colleague Bosomitu, our colleague Soare deals with the issue of, for us, very important, of institutionalized children in the 1980s, including normal, let's say, children, orphans, or abandoned children, and children, among them, children with disabilities. As you may remember out there in other countries, this became a big public issue immediately after 1989. It was one of the items of news that everybody heard about Romania, a recurring topic in the 1990s.
Avem până în momentul de față suficiente argumente și probe să afirmăm că împotriva acestor minori a existat un adevărat program de exterminare.
So they have evidence and they have proof that yes, there was an extermination program targeting this particular population.
Estimările noastre sunt că în perioada anilor 70-80, în România peste 15.000 de copii și-au pierdut viața în aceste centre.
So in the 1970s and 1980s, their documented estimates are that some 15,000 children lost their life under these circumstances, in these institutions. 15,000.
Toți acești copii nu mureau din cauza problemelor lor de sănătate, ci în marea lor majoritate din cauza bronhopneumoniei și a problemelor de nutriție, a malnutriției.
So it was not other health conditions that would kill them, but rather bronchopneumonia, which was a recurring condition, and of course malnutrition, or let alone mistreatment of other sorts. But these are documented chronic conditions that came under this particular reason.
Până în prezent am depus sesizări penale cu privire la infracțiuni contra umanității pentru 5 astfel de instituții. Prima dintre ele a fost depusă în iunie 2017. Aceasta a vizat 3 cămine atunci în 2017, una în 2018 și ultima dintre ele anul trecut cu privire la căminul spital numărul 4 din Plătărești. Okay.
So they have submitted since 2017 5 such court cases with all the documentation and necessary. About 5 such institutions, last year, and they are now submitted to the courts as penal cases as of crimes against humanity. I have to insist on this topic which was raised by Stefan Bosonitu before. This is a very interesting, desperate turn that recent history in Romania had to take in order to actually achieve a kind of justice. Belatedly, of course, partially, selectively, not because they select, because it's the system that selects and the documents. But this was a kind of desperate move to, which is what? It is a kind of diagnostic of the justice system. It shows that as it stands, the legal system of Romania and the juridical system of Romania is unable to deal with that. One reason being that it has been blocked, as I mentioned, by this narrative, by the communist narrative and the Securitate narrative, that from 1965 on, under the wise leadership of Comrade Nicolae Ceausescu, everything was wonderful in Romania. So find me cases from before that if we want to discuss. Afterwards there was no repression in Romania. So this is the move they had to make, as Stefan mentioned, to beat the system quite literally, and yes, invoke this superior legal and juridical and ethical moral paradigm which is crimes against humanity. And thus, he also mentioned that unfortunately the report of the Tismaneanu Commission, as it is called colloquially, the Presidential Commission, etc. It, of course, it ended with very nice, soft recommendations. Even those are, the case was considered closed. That's the funny thing about this discussion about communism, right? The declaration of President Băsescu, who, of all people, really shouldn't have been the person to indict communism, but he, and with a choir of supportive intelligentsia who knew better, but on the same time, in the same time was supporting him, they thought that this official condemnation of communism through a short declaration that calls it an illegitimate and criminal regime would be the end of it. Now, there were no legal consequences of developing a legal frame stating this particular thing. If this was illegitimate and criminal, then we have the arguments to support the legal cases against it, right? If a successor state, not because he was speaking in the name of the state, the president, for God's sake, I don't think he was very familiar with the raison d'etat, really, I don't think so. But, or he would understand what that means, in good Romanian, not in French. It's not this problem, but once the state, through its top representative, proclaims that regime as illegitimate and criminal, then legal action should normally follow unimpededly, and then would go to... and this was not transformed into, which is a similar case to the fact that from the point of view of the constitution of this republic, we are in a rather complex situation because it is not so clear what are the constitutional foundations in terms of constitutional right proper. I discussed this with expert constitutionalists in the world, but this is not a topic in Romania. For them, it is a big topic, and we had such a guest last time for a royal colloquium here. But in any case, it didn't go that far. But of course, they could not use this proclamation of the head of the state for the more, I would say, more trivial cases that not judging the system holistically, globally, which was a very nice thing to do, but for addressing precise, perfectly documented, tragic situations of obviously inhuman, cruel, unacceptable behavior of the state.
Ajungând și la ce s-a întâmplat cu dosarele, anul trecut am primit o primă soluție de clasare pentru primele 3 plângeri, iar anul acesta, în ianuarie, o clasare și pentru plângerea legată de ultimul cămin. În momentul de față, în lucru se află un singur dosar, cel legat de plângerea depusă anul trecut.
Clasare cu argumentul?
Cu argumentul că fapta nu există. Absolut șocant.
So, out of the 5 cases we are at this, only one, the last submitted, is still on. The former 4 were dismissed for this very simple legal reason. The crime does not exist. So they are now trying to concentrate on this, and again, in this I think Romania is a very interesting case, sadly, once again, an exception. That is, even when referring to well-established international legal standards, let alone the moral, ethical, forget about it. But when we talk about this, in a state that is a member of the European Union, and where everything, should, they run into this.
Procurorilor le-a trebuit mai mult de 6 ani ca să închidă dosarul, timp în care, efectiv, l-au lăsat în nelucrare.
So the prosecutors kept it idle for 6 years without ever touching it or discussing about it before they closed it. So they left the case out there, sidelined, forgot about them, these cases before they closed it.
Timp în care au audiat doar martori dintre cei care au lucrat respectiv în acele cămine, adică cei care se presupune că ar fi comis faptele respective.
So during this time they were just interviewing people who had worked in these institutions. Of course, my comment would be to expecting from them a kind of saintly ethics, in Max Weberian terms, right? The ethics of saints, that is, of self-condemnation. They would go there and say, but even that probably would have helped, because even if they would have gone there and said that, yes, I committed a crime, for the courts of Romania, the crime did not exist.
Ceea ce a fost iarăși foarte șocant pentru noi, afirmația unui procuror care a spus că așa erau vremurile și că situația copiilor de atunci nu diferă foarte mult de situația copiilor în ziua de astăzi. Cei instituționalizați.
A prosecutor said basically, well, such were the times, and actually the situation of institutionalized children then and today are not that different.
Nu faceți publice niciun fel aceste rezultate negative?
Au fost făcute publice.
Have they been made public? Yes, they have.
Formate și plângeri împotriva clasărilor.
And
they, of course, they also filed complaints against the closing of these cases. Yes, they remain active. It's funny how legal procedures they have to get this institute, which is fortunately under the aegis of the Romanian government. We are not here in an NGO. We are not here at the Memorial in Russia. We are not here at the marginal club of nostalgics of justice that is doing that. We are in a state institution, addressing as a state institution the other state institutions to really deal with this the way they should.
În momentul de față încercăm să epuizăm toate căile de atac din țară ca în cele din urmă să putem merge la cerul.
So now they are trying to exhaust all the possibilities of appeal in Romania before going to European instances and try to the European Court of Human Rights and things like that. So, but they, according to the rules of the European Union, of course, they into the common practice, they have to exhaust those internal ways first, avenues first, before they enter. This is very well. And while we are discussing and they are struggling to do these, of course, history goes on unabated, and you can still. Now this is an electoral year in Romania, like so, and you can expect all kinds of politicians. I haven't noticed this, I don't follow it very closely, but I haven't heard that this would be such a big issue for any of the political parties involved. So I'm not sure that it is on the agenda quite. Again, I don't read the fine prints of all the political parties and candidates, I really don't know. For reasons that I wouldn't like to expand on. But here we are. Cosmin Pop.
You know, I wonder, due to the lack of legal framework to judge the crime of communism, especially in 1780s, I think that we should negotiate all the time with states and politicians and society to bring up these crimes in front of the society. Because as a historian, I think that my main failure was to came to terms with communism, especially in the 70s and 80s. And this is a problem of all institutional academical system in Romania. Why we are very far from this kind of debates about distancing of the past. We should now find out the past and then to distancing from the past in Romania's case. Because I'm telling you something, The case is not only about the extermination program concerning the unrecoverable passion, the child patients, which is, in my opinion, it was my personal pressure to put the formula extermination program. It's not about the mortality only, which is very high in some cases, even 80s, higher than in the extermination camps in Germany, I should tell you. It's not about the lack of institutional reaction of the state, of the communist state. It's about the expelling these children from legal camp in Romanian socialist state. These children were not citizens, they were very fit to disappear, and this was due to the political and economical thinking of Ceausescu regime. So, which brings me to another thought. Now it's very hard to write history in Romania due to situation with archives. I'm not talking about only about the Council of Securitate archives. In my opinion, Sorin Antohi is rather an exception than a rule. I'm talking about state archives, about local archives, about Ministry of Interior Affairs archives. It's almost impossible to access.
That's right.
The party archives are severely incomplete. Severely incomplete. There are several sections crucial in the functioning of all communist systems, which is lacking from the National Archives. So, let me do not distancing from this past. Let me find out the truth, first of all, and then I will deal with it. So, in my opinion, it's time to borrow a concept not from Germany, not from Holland, not from Philippines, to borrow a concept from medieval history of Romania, a Yorga concept. It's called Byzance après Byzance. And let's name it communism after communism in 89 in post-communist Romania. So let's find out the truth. Let's find out who is responsible for this truth. Let's establish that the communist regime was a repressive, severely repressive one in 70s and 80s. And then we will deal with the past. Thank you.
But Cosmin Popa is writing like that, not only talking like this, he's also writing like that. I have to say that I was, how should I say, quite surprised by the tone of his prose about recent history, which is quite different from because I am going to talk in this one about the concept that I come up with, which is epidictic history. In Aristotle, epidictic discourse is a discourse that is meant for those who think already like you. You persuade those who think like you. It is an instance, it is a form of festive discourse, which is strengthening communities and audiences and making them solidary with the speaker. I'm talking about epidictic history because much of what historians write is a form of epidixis, a festive discourse making everybody feel happy, and they want to feel happy about the past. You bury it, you do not interrogate it, you do not engage it really as you should. So in this situation, yes, I think it is a topic for He mentioned the archives, of course.
Archives.
I didn't want to, yes, absolutely.
It's impossible even to find out how the economy is functioning.
Exactly.
Not only Securitate, not only the economy and the party.
Yeah, exactly, because he had this issue when dealing precisely with this, because there is this one thing, you bump into them and everything is classified.
Yes.
Now, I just raised this issue, and this is going to be really my last point with this, the interest of comparative note. There is no archive of the secret services from democratic France. There is no French CNCAC. There's no German CNCAC. And I was joking with people whom I know for a lifetime from those countries. I'll give you one example. A French lecturer at the University of Liège, Jean-Noël Mathieu, with whom I did a book of conversations. He did it with me about, life under, because he knew it very well in the 1980s. He was one of those foreign lecturers who were totally supportive of what, knowing exactly what they were risking and knowing everything. So he's a fantastic person. But we were joking at some point together, saying that, well, I told him, Jean, I'll never have access to your CNCACs to see that part of the story. And this is an abuse against historians. That is declaring as classified documents everything for the most anodyne activities of any institution when you run into the people who... Because I can understand why in the 1990s it was impossible to reach any form of documents before they purged the archives, because that is one other point, right? They destroyed documents systematically, they purged files, and so forth. For instance, why do you think that when I asked for my documents about me, besides receiving documents that I should have never received, which were documents violating the private life of my friends from that time, right? Now, the amorous life of my close fraternal friend Livio Antonesi, whose birthday is today, was better known to me than to him, because I was a witness and I was remembering all the details he was telling me, all in absolute details. I knew it better than him. So I didn't need the Council for the Securitate Archive to deliver me those documents 40 years later. But that was an abuse against his right to private life. A similar thing was done in connection to Ioan Petruculianu, your former Groningen fellow citizen, about whom I received from, at the same time, papers, documenting the fact that he was spied upon by the brother of his wife. Was Romanian, the brother was Romanian engineer from Ploiești, going there taking trips and talking to the Securitate Poncavemar. I had no, normally this should not, because we are friends, absolutely. I'm specialized, among others, in the life and work of Culianu, that's all, but that was not a request for, in general for study materials that I wanted to know. It was about me. So they were doing that. And then comes the thing, when people such as Luca Pizzu, my closest friends there, Livio Antonesi, Dan Petrescu were asking for, upon receiving copies from me in 2007, asking for their own, they did not receive them. So this is why the only archive which is impossible to read, unfortunately, because of Luca Pizzu's flamboyant style, he was full of allusions and things that you cannot, if you don't, it's too, okay, so he wrote that book about our group using documents, only documents from me, because he couldn't get more. which I find quite remarkable. So, yeah, we deal with issues that start from access to documents to everything else to the courts of justice. And this is the situation, I guess, quite well encapsulated. Now, we open the floor now for comments and questions, if any. Yes.
I have a question to the IICCMER researchers here. That you mentioned, your colleague is not here who talked about this, the cases
lucky.
of children.
Justice.
But did you generate more cases in courts based on your research, or only regarding your
research is undergoing research for
Investigations.
investigation and documentation research on several other institutions. Yes.
Yeah, but can you just maybe say a few issues that you are thinking of bringing to court based on your investigation?
Yes. So there are several directions. I'm strangely linked with this institute as a specialist in contemporary history. So I put the pressure on the syntagma of extermination program. But there are several conditions, several directions of investigations, because they, according to the law, they should turn into justice cases. These investigations, they are frontier transgressions, especially in Hungary and Yugoslavia. There are 24 children institutions in Romania, which where institutionalized children were held. So we expect at least 20 charges against the former managers, at least former managers, and then we are hoping against the former managers of the general network of institutionalized children in Romania. And then there is another direction concerning political psychiatry, which is coming now, which brings me to another discussion about the importance of ethics in the medical sciences in Romania during totalitarian regime. And these are our main directions.
So once again, this is Bea Huska. She will probably get in touch with you because she's investigating, as I said, human rights violations before 1989 mostly, but probably coming up to the, yes. Thank you, Bea. Yes?
Good morning. I will congratulate you for inviting Professor De Baets in Bucharest, because 4 years ago I proposed in IICCMER conference about international censorship, and Professor De Baets was my first invitee on my list, but my project was rejected. And as I promised you yesterday, to present the remarkable book of Professor De Baets. This is Censorship of Historical Thought. That's why I asked for documentation, because we have in these books all country of the world, and we have for each, this is arranged in chronological way, and we have for each country, we have a rich bibliography. And then my other question was about, so I studied 1 month in Central European University, and censorship bibliography was a human rights section, so it's like a human rights domain. And I studied censorship in communist institution in communist bloc. I have not documents in English, but I have only this except, and you are of course the first of my list. It's not because your family name is De Baets, but also because you are, as I said yesterday, a unique specialist. And my question was, what about the censorship of censor of censorship specialist? Because as I said, we have especially with our day contemporary censorship study, we cannot actually, I can't pretend that I studied censorship only in communist period. We have a very interesting history of censorship institution in Romania. It was open, but from other country of communist bloc is till our days. But the institution of censorship was by Ceausescu was closed in 1977, and the classified documents are declassified after 30 or 40 years, and that's why I can study that in Romanian archives. So my question is, if you have other way to say your truth. I'm a writer, for example, and my other way is to do fiction, and I have a novel about censorship in English this time, and I would like to offer you, maybe you can read also fiction, but it's based on my study on documents archives about censorship. And you said something about the perspective. And the most important specialist in censorship is American, and you are in Europe, and you are a very specialist. So.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you.
And this is for
now this is expanding the.
And this is my, but I
yeah. Now. Liliana Korobka, who just intervened, was there last evening with us, and she is our, how shall I say, expansion into the former Soviet Union, because she has a better
I'm born in Soviet Union in Moldova.
So that is an expansion of Romania's history into the Soviet Union, and which is in fact a situation that is also understudied and underexplored. Rather, especially younger historians from the Republic of Moldova are in Moldova proper and abroad in their growing diaspora, which is
actually, censorship is not only a historical domain. I'm philologist, I'm teacher of Latin literature.
yes.
But I evaluated because here I don't...
Latin is a dying, not just a dead, but a dying language. Right?
Yeah.
But anyhow, yes, as a writer of fiction and as a researcher, Liliana Korobka has contributed to this discussion once again, bringing the other Romania, the Republic of Moldova, into the fold. Yes, thank you very much. If any other comments and questions? Yes, Daniel Philip.
Yes, thank you all for coming here and for bringing this interesting.
Thank you for doing it, making it possible.
I just have one remark because we discussed about historiography and abuses in history. Let's not forget what happened with National Archives 2 years ago, in 2022,
yes.
when they started to say that it's a problem with law and they reclassified the archives
yes.
for at least, if I remember well, at least 6 months, and everything was closed. And when they prepared the law, they said there will be a public debate, but it wasn't public at all. They called some
kind of.
Yes, they simulated that it's public, and after that they gave the law, but not all the archives are still open. And what is funny that many of them were open in the past until 2022, but after that they say they cannot be consulted because they now are classified again.
There is a
This is Romania.
There is a nice play upon words. It's less than philosophical, but it was made by a philosopher in Romania, Constantin Noica. He was talking about something that is open and closes, and about something that is closed and open, and he produced a kind of, which in French would be philosophade, not really philosophical discussion about that. Indeed, archives are those entities that open at some point for some, and then close at some point for some or for all. And Goswin obviously knows this situation that I invoked last evening from the former Soviet Union, when my American colleagues at Michigan were desperately running to Moscow when the archives were, and I to bring more documents when this was possible. And I will never forget this hero of one of my former colleagues and head of department at the time, William Rosenberg, who said this, who went to Lubyanka, to the archives, through some bribery and so forth. The year was 93, the winter of 93. And then he went there rushing, missing all his appointments. I had to do, anyhow, he went there. He didn't have time to explain who was missing the plane. Coming back, he told me the full story. He was there, and he was absolutely happy to rescue those documents, knowing that a moment, the window of opportunity would. And among others, there was this character, which is a hero for archivists. Probably there are many like her everywhere in the archives. We focus about archivists, but at Lubyanka, there was a woman who was coming every day for work at 7 and leaving whenever this was possible. And her job was burning documents. She was a very, sturdy, hard-working woman who was working hard there at this. And she was still at work after 1991. This is all about archives.
Romania is world famous for its ill treatment of archives.
Yeah.
But that is the sad reputation of Romania.
Yeah.
What I didn't know was these children in institutions and the policy of crimes against humanity towards them. But what was the rationale of the regime to institutionalize
eugenics?
To bring down the expenses. To bring down the expenses, not to
any kind of philosophy.
Yes, to bring down the expenses. It's not only for children, but also for all society.
Yeah.
So there was a whole system, institutionalized system
of cutting costs
around this idea of cutting costs.
Yeah. The children
With
also
cutting costs with any cost.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it was.
And we have to.
But it's also the context,
Yeah.
the nationalist policy regime, so these
That was a formal policy starting in 1990s.
Since there was no or very limited access to abortion,
Yes.
there was a number of unwanted children abandoned. Roma children got more attention internationally after 1990, but this was a nationwide phenomenon with everybody affected. Yes, many unwanted children after unwanted pregnancies were there in the world, and this was a way of solving that problem. Because of course, they had to deal with it. Okay, I would like to thank Antoon De Baets. I would like to thank Ellie, his wife, who is a you know about this phrase in Latin, homo viator, The guy was looking, they are homines viatores. They are actually walking a lot, which helped them, I guess, a lot yesterday when we have been walking almost all day. But there is more time to walk, of course. Thank you all. Thank you, Your Excellency, for coming, dear friend, for being with us. Thank you, the institution, for hosting us, and thank you.